Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of our symposium. We are really excited to have you all with us again today. We would like to welcome our guest, our keynote speaker today, Dr. Laila Kadiwal, who comes from the University College of London, where she's a lecturer. She works at the intersections of global justice, decoloniality, identity, citizenship, conflict, migration, and education. She has researched in India, Pakistan, Tajikistan, and the UK, and she has specialist interests in the role of education in Muslim contexts. Additionally, Dr. Kadiwal also co-directs Best Foot Music, that's interesting, an intercultural music and arts organization. It connects refugee and marginalized musicians with extensive music networks and communities in the UK. Dr. Laila was awarded her DPhil at the University of Sussex. She received an MSc in Higher Education from the University of Oxford, and she also studied at the School of Oriental and African Studies. And we are very excited to hear your talk today. So welcome, and we look forward to your presentation. And of course, as per usual, we will invite Q&A thereafter, and we look forward to a good deliberation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Nuran David. Bonjour, sabah khair, salam alaikum. And I'm really pleased to see a lot of faces that I managed to meet yesterday. So thank you for coming. And thank you so much, Professor Nuran, for a generous introduction. And Professor Salas for making my trip so easy. You've been really key to making it smooth, and every one of you for making it possible. And I'm honored to be here, and I've really learned a lot from every single presenter yesterday. So I just want to acknowledge your contribution. You can see it's filled with notes because of what you said and what I've done. Thank you. So I'm going to take slightly different angle today, but we will still talk about central to our conversation is Muslim women and women's contribution. And I find it more comfortable if I'm not in the barrier, or like between you and me, there is no barrier. But just imagine it doesn't exist. So okay, so women's engagement in scholarship, policy, pedagogy, and protest are perspective. And yesterday, Bilal told me he's very keen to understand what I mean by protest. So hopefully we'll get to it. Shall I go to the... Yes, I can manage. Okay, so I'll start with a story. Just because I move, let me know if you can't hear me at any point of time. So let me start with the storytelling, which is a part of Muslim tradition, right? Storytelling. So in December 2016, I was recruited at the Institute of Education, University College London, as teaching fellow on a precarious 3-month contract. Look at our neoliberal world. So I was given my first assignment was to mark essays as tutor. And the first essay I marked argued in an impeccable British English. So somebody I could make out clearly was born and brought up in Britain. Most likely the way it was written. And the argument they made that Afghan Muslim women were oppressed by their culture and their religion and their men and extremist men. And then they applied human rights perspective, referred to a body of extensive scholarship on human rights and how this violates their right to education. And then they applied theories of gender and sexuality and masculinity, again, extensively referenced, and talked about toxic construction of masculinity. And then they said the USAID and DFID and how these Western development actors were actually actively helping these women out, saving them. And I felt deeply uncomfortable. And now what happens? Every assignment is marked by 2 examiners. the first examiner was a professor, very well known in studies. I wouldn't give you the name, and they marked it an A, and I marked it a D. And imagine I'm on a precarious contract, hired only for 3 months on maternity cover for somebody else. So there is a huge power disparity in which I had to make my case. Then I didn't have access to decolonial perspective, but I had the language, but I had a perspective that I later discovered is decolonial perspective. So I asked them, why did you mark them an A? So they said, because it met the criteria. Look, we asked them to refer to an educational issue. They did in Global South. Mind you, this entire center only looks at Global South and is filled with only white people, except me. So they did that. Secondly, I asked them to refer to 2 theories. In this course, we asked them to refer to 2 theories, not in the course. They referred to human rights, they referred to, grasped it very well. Look at their understanding of masculinity and patriarchy and human rights. Brilliant. They refer to all the international instruments and the body of literature review. And they have a very clear critical argument, extensively referenced. So it meets the criteria. Now, what is your rationale? I'm like, oops. So what is my rationale? Let's discover that. Now, before we go to that, I would like you to observe this image. What do you notice? What do you see? The painting is called American Progress. It was very widely in circulation through engravings and lockets and all that in the 1900s settler colonial project. It was drawn by John Gast, who is a very upper middle class, in fact, aristocratic, white, heteronormative man. What do you say? Very quick response.
White woman.
Yes. What is she doing?
Colonial progress. I mean, from the perspective of the colonial lady, white.
And tell me more. What else do you see? Do you see any contrast?
Yes, the light. The light. She's bringing
Yes.
the light.
So that's the enlightened side. Urbanization, prosperity, modernity, the train, she's stringing along train, the electric wire, the mask, school book. It's a school book on it. School book to these barbaric people who live in darkness, right? Who are darker skinned, live in the darkness, no knowledge, and these peaceful people are coming to them. And this white woman is seen as wearing this white Roman toga, which is a symbol of purity in Eurocentric perspective. Really angelic, stands above all, and goes to deliver education, brings human rights, brings, all that. So what my professor saw was the goodness. And what I saw as an examiner was what was not shown in the essay, in the image. So what is not shown in the image? Any quick thoughts?
The peoples, the natives.
The indigenous populations being displaced, genocide, which is still erased as of now. If I share with you my experience of writing a blog on Palestine with the very same professor several years later, I'll share later. So the story of genocide is erased, displacement, land grab for mining companies. The funding is hidden. Funding comes from the World Bank, mining companies, the politicians who have an interest in certain power relationship. I saw forced sterilization, which is not here. The racism, which is out there, right? That the social groups, look at the hierarchy, the superior and the inferior, the advanced the primitive, they have knowledge. This has superstition and irrationality. So the way this image shows you, that's what I saw in the essay. What's not there is what I saw, right? And Gross-Fugel, decolonial scholar, argues that the westernized universities, and when we say westernized university, it is not just the universities in the West. The universities around the world wedded to westernized project. They have these 5 characteristics. Racism, the hierarchy of who is the superior social group in those contexts and who is the inferior group, needs saving, rescuing, right? Modernity, coloniality. So the shine of modernity is emphasized, like we're going to progress, we're going to come out of backwardness and we're going to develop and advance. But what is hidden is that all that progress and advancement is actually based on mass displacement, climate injustices, racism, indigenous populations, grabbing of land from indigenous populations for mining and extraction and oil and gas, and a lot of violence of the languages and cultures. So there is racism, there is that coloniality which is hidden side of the modernity. I dominate, therefore I am. Now in this Western thought, the Descartes' philosophy, I think, therefore I am, is central to Westernized university, that we're thinking, we think, we argue critically, right? But what it doesn't tell us, as Dussel and Gross-Fugel say, I exterminate, therefore I am, right? Where was Descartes based? Amsterdam. What was Amsterdam? Center of one of the empires. So he wasn't thinking because he thinks, therefore he was the one existing as the highest epistemology because he was exterminating so much. Not he himself, but the colonial project. Then epistemic racism and sexism. So I also noticed that in that essay, if you're going to come and help me out, you will actually first engage with what I have to say, right? What critical voices and movements have produced knowledge, you will engage with that. But the essay had extensively referenced human rights literature emerging from global North universities where white scholars were talking to each other. The essay had extensively referenced the masculinity, sexuality, but completely from a Eurocentric perspective by referring to only global North scholars who were talking to each other and citing each other and creating canons out of it. But they hadn't referenced critical voices coming from Muslim critical feminists from critical Muslim feminist contexts. So there was epistemic racism that shows up in absence of our standpoints, historical and contemporary, of feminist struggle. That's epistemic racism. That's what I saw in the essay. And sexism, because a lot of this reference material were white men. So there was sexism as well. So when you go back, check your reading list. So there was sexism, and Gross-Fugel said that sexism comes because in order to establish this Western-centric capitalist heteronormative masculine project, even white women with knowledge, indigenous wisdom, and independence and businesses were burned as witches in Europe. There was a huge persecution against white women. So even they are disciplined, right? So there is epistemic racism and sexism in westernized universities. Finally, there is also saviorism and civilizing mission, right? So this is what I was seeing in the essay, which we contrasted with the examiner. And that's where my journey began as a Muslim critical scholar of how Islamophobia and how gender is used to ferment further Islamophobia and racism. And the foundations of this kind of knowledge production goes back. Anyone knows where this picture is from? Alhambra, right? So in 1492, when the defeat of Muslims happened in Europe by Ferdinand and Isabella, and they established a Christian Catholic empire, there was genocide. It started with the genocide of Jews and Muslims, expulsion of them, grabbing of land where they lived, right? So there is a long trajectory of genocide, which is coupled with epistemicide. So that became the foundations of westernized universities. Let's look at Morocco. When France came, how did they present themselves? Again, use of feminism, women, gender. What is it bringing? It is bringing to Morocco the civilization as if you didn't have. Wealth as if you were only poor.
Yes.
And peace as if you were violent. Right? Look at British, how it justified coming to South Asia. In fact, from the Cape to Cairo, bringing civilization. So these ideas are very deeply intertwined with the projects funded by the West to our various parts. So Professor Laila Abulugad is an extremely powerful Palestinian American anthropologist. Her father was a noted Palestinian academic and mother was a noted academic from Jewish background. So she writes this book, Do Muslim Women Need Saving? And she argues, basically taking the Afghanistan case. Now, I remember some of you asked question around extremism yesterday. Now, we cannot understand contemporary ideas of who is using the language of terrorism for whom and extremism for whom, and who is not reversing the gaze on themselves, and who is putting it on. So this is very important. Now, some of us might know that the global race for hegemony between Moscow and Washington and then their allies have really led wars around the world, right? Including in Afghanistan. So Mujahidins were friends, right? Until the agenda differed and then they became extremists. Yeah. So this is quite agenda driven. What were they taught with? So they were taught refugee education. The Afghan young people who were displaced because of this fight between the Washington-led and Moscow-led, these two global powers fighting out each other with their regional and international allies, actually retreated Afghanistan as the buffer zone, right? And while treating the buffer zone, a lot of young people were displaced to the borders of Pakistan. What did they do? Developed refugee education in University of Nebraska, funded by USAID and taxpayers' money in USA. 13 million copies were made, translated in Dari and Pashto. But what was underneath refugee education? Any guess? The jihad literacy. The alphabet, the ABC of jihad. Made in USA, supported by Saudi Arabia. Very much interest of the Pakistan. So these curriculum taught J for jihad, jihad is mandatory, Jamil went to jihad, I too will go to jihad. So this jihadi literacy curriculum developed in the USA, circulated in Afghanistan to create mujahidins and then generation of Talibans, has today become a very important textbook for ISIS, for very different groups of Taliban today. So there is a lot of reparative measures that need to happen, right? So, and what have women doing? Women have very long history of struggle. They have struggled against the Russian and the British empires, caught up in that. They've struggled against the tie-up between the corporation based in USA, the US administration and Taliban, who are forming agreement to build oil and gas pipelines. So they've been fighting for very long, right? So do they need saving? Laila Abulugad asks. No, they need justice. They don't need charity. They need dignity, right? And all this needs to stop. Okay, so I'll stop here. So then I noticed, as being based in the Center for Education and International Development that works with World Bank, OECD, UNESCO, UN, various UN institutions, and tons of donors, continues to produce in the West, I noticed that these are kind of the campaign. Then Malala becomes a way to fight extremism. Then girls are told it's your onus to fight extremism, created through geopolitical agendas, right? Then women are seen as, oh, knowledge is power. With education, you can kill terrorism. But what it masks is the broader geopolitical agenda through which some of these processes are happening, not because women are not playing their role. They're resisting. So, the director of Amnesty International, Rafia Zakaria, is another author and intellectual, and she writes about against white feminism, where she looks at how conventional feminism places the importance on the experience of white women while excluding women of color, that includes Muslim women. So the standpoints arising from critical Muslim perspectives are continuously undermined. So if you look at today's world, the global political economy, the Jomo Promise Sundaram has created this. If you were to redistribute the world, rethink the world in terms of just the income distribution, look at Africa and global south. If you just look at the wealth redistribution in the world, there it's massively inflated, right? Who are the top 10 richest people in the world? At the expense of billions of people in the world, right? So if you look at 252 men have more wealth than 1 billion women and girls in Africa and Latin America and Caribbean combined. That does not mean that in global south, you don't have global north. You do have global north and global south, the pockets, which concentrate, right? So if you draw different kind of geography, then you will have pockets of inflations and the below as well. And they work in harmony quite often. So all that affects Muslim women and their agency and their freedom around the world. And yet, then you have this change starts with the girl. No, change starts with the elites, not with marginalized girls. If you look at Africa itself, according to 2017 data published by The Independent, Africa subsidizes the rest of the world by 32 billion a year, right? If you look at the 203 billion goes out of Africa through extraction, 41 billion extracted each year, only aid money, so-called aid money to save girls in Africa is, or other marginalized people as well. So the root causes of marginalization of people is not addressed. And yet, saviorism is promoted in some of this scholarship. Now, let's look at, but as I said, women protest, and women have a long history of protest. Another thing last year that became very important concern of white feminism is Muslim women in Iran. Lots of webinars, talks were organized to talk about how Iranian women are being oppressed. We're not denying that. We're not denying that. Yeah, but we are saying when they're not just victims, they are also activists. They're also scholars. They're also women with agency who are fighting back. So they're not just victims. They're producers of knowledge. And they're producing knowledge through their struggle. And this is where I want to challenge our notion of school and education. What is education? What is school? What is learning? Is it only formed in the classroom? Or is it happening through marginalized girls and marginalized women's own everyday struggle? And the knowledge that they produced at their struggle. How are we valuing that knowledge? Whether it's in rural area of Morocco or somebody who sits in London. How are we looking at that knowledge produced through struggle? So if you look at Iran, women have a long history of resisting oil extraction, fighting for democracy, but those efforts were thwarted. So to say the change starts with girls is highly hypocritical. The girls have been always at the forefront of fighting injustices. So, and Africa is actually always at the forefront. If we see humanity migrated out of Africa, then first feminist struggle should have started here, right? And okay, so the point is, now I'll come very quickly to India because it concerns me. That's where my research body of scholarship is, that's where my family is, and that's where I grew up. Now, what you have is a far-right extremist government whose ideology is Hindutva, which is a fascist ideology, heavily drawn from Hitler and Mussolini's works. But what it does is uses those tropes, replaces Jews with Muslims in India, right? And it very much allies with world's authoritarians. You can see the image in the middle as well. It is a major exporter of weapons from Israel as well, and software for surveillance. And this is used to contain so-called Muslims in India who actually come from oppressed caste backgrounds. Who are the Muslims of India? Muslims in India are actually at the bottom of the caste hierarchy along with Dalits and Adivasis. And a lot of Dalits and Adivasis and nomadic people are the ones who, in order to flee caste-based oppression, adopted Islam or Christianity or Buddhism. So this is casteism, showing these Muslims and Christians and Dalits their place in the caste hierarchy. That is the current Hindutva project. And then you have world's so-called democratic leaders holding hands on the name of global peace and security. All of this affects Muslim women. Currently, Genocide Watch, which is world's foremost genocide watch body that had predicted Rwandan genocide 5 years before its occurring, has put India on emergency alert on the 8th and 9th stage of genocide, which is advanced. What's going on is it's promoted as if these Muslims are leading Corona jihad. So coronavirus didn't come to India. Muslims brought it, Corona bomb, right? Love jihad. They are luring Hindu women. So, and thus a threat to our women. Land jihad, they are grabbing our land, they are populating, they are also occupying media, and Hindus are just wrapping themselves in the garb of secularism like ostrich and not looking. There is a real propaganda of existential threat generated by far-right extremist fascist organization, which is in power. Muslims are held as bad apples that need to be annihilated, taken out. So what Muslim women are doing? Incredibly inspiring protest. This is Shaheen Bagh, and these are Shaheen Bagh's women. They are students, they are grandmothers. They are women from all walks of life. So this is what happened. In 2019, December, the Modi government passed citizenship law amendment, which made it possible to take away citizenship from Muslims in India. And this law is compared to Nuremberg law, where citizenship from Jews was made possible to be removed by Hitler, compared with Rohingyas in Myanmar, when in 85, military government in Myanmar passed citizenship law, which made it possible to take away citizenship rights from Rohingya. So this new law says that if you are refugees from any of the neighboring countries, not Sri Lanka, not Myanmar, but Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, if you belong to any of these religions, Hindu, Christian, Jain, Parsi, Sikh, then you can get citizenship, but if you're Muslim, you won't. And then they passed another law called NRC, which has made every Indian, so now you're not citizen unless you prove documentarily that you are a citizen. So lots of documents you have to show in order to claim that you are a citizen. And a lot of Muslims fall under oppressed caste, historically marginalized background, and most of India does not have documents. Documents is not a culture or legal. It became legal requirement only in recent times. So a lot of Indians don't have documents. So what happens? Now you combine these two laws, Citizenship Amendment and National Registration of Citizenship. So NRC, National Registration of Citizen, makes everybody show document, but then many people don't have documents. So CAA means, oh, if you're not Muslim, you will get citizenship. But if you're Muslim, you won't. This is another way to make 200 million Muslim citizenship less. So a lot is happening here. So who have become very important defenders? So when this law was passed in December 2019, students of Jamia Millia Islamia, which is a prominent institution in India, and students of Aligarh Muslim University, another prominent institution in India, and Jawaharlal Nehru University, another prominent university in India, they started protesting. So police comes into the campus, starts beating, brutalizing students. I started receiving on my social media feed because I have students from these locations, these institutions. And especially in Jamia Millia Islamia, it was extremely brutal violence, persecution of students. So as soon as Shaheen Bagh, which is a neighborhood in which Jamia Millia Islamia is located, women heard that their children are being beaten up by police, so they come out on the street, about 15 of them. They occupy the street in protest that to save their children and students from being beaten up. 15 women become 50, become 100, become 1,000, become 10,000, become 100,000. Because Shaheen Bagh is not just Muslim women. Shaheen Bagh is all oppressed people, irrespective of their faith and regional background, who don't have documents and thus are equally at risk. Because we don't have efficient bureaucracy there, right? So then climate activists join, human rights activists join, the various regional minorities come in, labor movement unions come in. You have an intersectional solidarities laid by Muslim women. Not only in India, globally, Shaheen Baghs emerged, hundreds of Shaheen Bagh emerged across India and globally in protest. And you see women defending men. So the idea that Muslim women need saving from their men, these women just completely turned it around. Because men are at the trait of being lynched and being arrested, being criminalized. So women have become the wrap around them that we are the one defending. So it just challenged that equation as well. Young girls across faith background are holding hand in defiance of toxic masculinity, which is supported by global power, and they're saying, come walk with us. We have set out to save the country, come walk with us. So Muslim women have become central to saving India from fascism now. And then you have memes going around how they are standing up to police, how they are standing up to the Hindutva extremists to save India. Women are actually at the forefront of protests. Afrin Fatima, her home got demolished, and bulldozer genocide is another thing happening in India. Demolitions of lands and properties of Muslim. But she is saying, student leader, they can't break us. They can break my house, not me. So these women are theorizing from the place of margin. They're teaching each other, educating each other beyond school, through book launches, through songs, through writing poetries. And they're widening our understanding of feminism that involves much more than gender parity. It includes consciousness of capitalism, racism, colonialism, imperialism, ableism, sexual-based oppression, and the environmental injustices. And they are creating some of the most transformative visions of justice. So women around the world from Muslim context are playing very key role. Now, I know that I'm running out of time, but I can talk about Bailam, how Muslim women are leading some of those struggles. You have iconic images. And let's end with free. Thank you.
Thank you, Laila. I think we can all agree that was really a liberty. We really enjoyed your presentation. It's fascinating to see how these pieces all tie together and the intersections between race and gender and class. So thank you for that. I invite any questions. I have one for you already online from Bushra. And she's asking, what are the main arguments Muslim scholars advocate in response to the propaganda issued by the extremist far right against Islam? So a quite broad-based question.
I think it's a very good question. Shall we take maybe 3 questions and then I can...
Okay, sure. Are there any questions from the floor here? Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's really brilliant. It's inspiring. It's like the best thing you can start our morning with. And my question is, you started talking about decolonization, started talking about westernized universities. My question is, how do you think we could like approach this decolonization of our universities, our westernized universities, in which higher education is all about that Western exported history book that we all study, that we all fill our brains with? Thank you. Very good questions.
Thank you. I have one more for you. I have one more for you from Professor Shah Alam. If they speak, I'm presuming the protesters, if they speak against the present government, surely they'll be banned and harassed by the secular Hindus who raise voice in favor of Muslims. So I'm assuming there's some backlash for those who protest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you comment on that, please?
Can I add here? You mentioned the blog on Palestine. Do you want to say more about that?
Yes.
Thanks.
So now we have 4, Laila.
Sure. Thank you. No, I think it's a great question. Thanks for asking them. The first is, what are some of the main arguments against to fight against the far right extremism? Coming from India, what they're saying is we don't need secularism. We need justice. We don't need charity. We need you to address the root cause of the problem. That is the first central argument. The second thing they are saying, if you want to come and help me, come not because I need your help, show up in solidarity because you also need saving. Now that's very important. Why? Because, okay, today what they're saying, you're coming for me. Tomorrow they will come for you, right? Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Today they're curtailing my agency, my freedom, killing me. Tomorrow that means that erosion of democracy helps no one, right? Hollowing out of freedom and human rights and agency helps no one. And what are they doing? Now another argument is scapegoat argument. What's happening is, and this is where another challenge for all of us is, globally, what's happening is climate change and climate injustice is ensuring that massive amount of people are having to leave where they have historically been. So they are on move. Globally, there is rise of far-right extremism that is playing the politics of us and them, right? So what they're doing, they're using this dominant group in power are the ones presenting themselves as victims. And who are they scapegoating? They're scapegoating socio-economically marginalized minorities in their respective contexts, which in India are Muslims and Dalits and Christians and Adivasis. And Muslims come from these backgrounds, right? So Muslims have become scapegoat. So that way the authoritarian doesn't have to take any responsibility. Oh, because they are the threats. They are the one brought coronavirus. They are the threat. Because of them, economy is going down. They are the threat. Because of them, we have security problem. So Muslims have the scapegoat is another key argument here. So what they're saying, They are scapegoating in order to not take any responsibility towards egalitarian and transformative visions in India. And when it doesn't happen, it actually affects everybody. So they are making argument around solidarity versus careerism. They are unpacking the how Muslims are being treated as scapegoats, when the real issue is being masked. They're also saying address the root causes of problem. Don't just say that, oh, women, you need to just change yourself and take responsibility to change your circumstances. You think change the root causes of the problem. We're doing our role here. So these are the key arguments. The second, westernized university. How do we decolonize westernized university? So I would say, first step, you could also check your reading list, your curriculum. Think about whose standpoints, what are the silenced and subjugated voices. That does not mean that anything that comes from the West or any other part of the world we need to remove. I'm not saying that. Universality. All the voices, as Prophet Muhammad said, gain knowledge from wherever it comes. So we don't think in terms of binary of East and West, color. If those are standpoints, critical standpoints that widen everybody's freedom and agency and everybody's dignity, those arguments are welcome. But if those arguments are there to promote saviorism, like in that images or in that essay, which benefits only a particular social group at the expense of racism against the entire religion, culture, and people, then that standpoint is not emancipatory standpoint, right? So look at the beyond the skin colors and beyond the northerners, what are the standpoints? Capitalism got instilled through westernized university, which directly clashes so many value systems. So what are the clashes? There are egalitarian value systems that do not fit in the capitalist value system. The egalitarian value system, like respect for the environment, treating environment as nature as sacred, as guardian. Those standpoints are there in Islam, right? And not just in Islam, in other indigenous mythologies also, that treat nature as mother, in kinship relationship, treat it with dignity, it nurtures you, so you nurture it back. That doesn't fit with capitalist value, which treats nature as commodity, to be extracted and to be used for men, right? So look at the standpoints, bring in these egalitarian standpoints, right? Also, what is epistemic justice? Are critical feminist voices, critical Black voices, critical voices missing in the curriculum from our own context? Let's put it back. You know how Fatima Fahri is never mentioned in our feminist scholarship in the West? It's never mentioned. It's never mentioned that they see it as dark age. The dark age, where everybody was in the dark. But they miss the point that alchemy, chemistry, algebra, astronomy, medicine, A.B.C. Sina's book, the major book was the fundamental text in medicine in Western Europe, right? Like our colleague here presented. So in a lot of curriculum, these contributions are erased, silenced. Let's bring them back, right? So how do we decolonize? Is through universality, addressing silences, and ensuring epistemic justice, bringing in standpoints that are egalitarian but have been marginalized through the effort to globalize capitalist system. Again, in capitalism, there is individualism, there is competition. There is no regard for equality. But you bring in collective justice from our tradition that talks about responsibility to the community. It talks against competition. It talks about peace and justice around, which is not there in capitalist value system, which promotes global hegemony for power and wars. Right? So let's bring back value system that's missing. So westernized this is how we can decolonize. Now the third question is backlash. Very important question from online. Yes, there is a huge toxic masculine backlash. It's like patriarchs feel humiliation when women challenge the patriarchs, right? They see, oh, my honor is being challenged by these women, let me punish them. So yes, Shahin Bagh and their women have suffered from a lot of punishment. Their children have been picked up, put into the jail. Their neighborhood has been burned. Their houses are being destroyed. Yes, there is a huge backlash. But has that meant that the movement has disappeared? No, it hasn't. When people are oppressed, people don't become just victims. They also lead movements to resist that victimhood. So yes, there is a huge backlash. The fourth question, Palestine. So recently, some scholars in my center decided that they will write a blog. And I said, let's write in solidarity. So we did. We said how Palestine was under British mandate. We said how huge anti-Semitism and Holocaust of Jews in Europe, which is problem, right? Instead of taking responsibility to rectify, they were made nation state here, and we talked about Nakba, we talked about ethnic cleansing, we talked about land displacement, we talked about the occupation in the West Bank and occupied Palestinian territories. We talked about siege for the last 16 years of Gaza. We talked about collective punishment for them. We talked about seeing that right to defend is not exclusive to particular nations and groups. Right to self-defense is available to people who are oppressed. We talked about the tradition, within Jewish tradition as well, there is tradition of, so when Jews were being persecuted, there was a Jewish egalitarian tradition standing against the state which is violating the less powerful group. You see, that tradition is there to stand up against the state in policy that violates less powerful group, right? So we talked about all that. And what happened, then this blog was sent to universities, higher up people, they erased everything. Erased Nakba, erased Israel, erased British rule, erased Holocaust, erased the ethnic cleansing, erased expulsion, erased seas, everything got erased. Left Hamas. As first sentence. Brought it as a first sentence. So it read like following Hamas. Subsequently, Gaza is devastated. You see the point?
Yes.
Huge erasure of injustices. Epistemicide right in front of my eyes in the blog that I wrote. My co-authors agreed to have these changes. I didn't. At enormous risk to my own job. But these injustices have to be addressed. Right? So yes, that's the story of the blog. So finally it got published. I said, if you're not going to mention British rule in creating this mess, if you're not going to talk about the state of Israel's, the founding is itself based on Nakba. If you're not going to talk about it, you're not going to talk about Hamas. If you want to apply humanitarian principle of mourning lives, you mourn all lives. If you're going to apply humanitarian principle, apply it consistently. So it was the same story, right? Don't show genocide, don't show land displacement, don't show racism against indigenous people, don't show the mining companies grabbing land, don't show propaganda, but show how we are coming to help you, to bring you out of your, your brown man oppressing brown women. We're coming here to save you. Stop that. Right? So yes, so that kind of knowledge production continues. That's your answer.
Thank you so much, Laila. Sure. So I'll take one from the floor and have another one online.
So thank you so much for your very insightful presentation. I've really enjoyed and learned more, especially about jihad in the curriculum. It's like there was a puzzle missing because it's not really a topic of specialty, but it's like something I like to search. So that's really enlightening. So I would like to draw back to Gayatri Spivak's
Yes.
epoch-making question, can the subaltern speak?
Yes.
So I believe, like you talked about victimization, which I consider it's a sort of a confiscation of agency. So now in the era of digitalization, I'm an indigenous, I am an Amazigh, so we're indigenous peoples of North Africa. So there is actually a growing, a rising of indigenous activism, cyber activism to be more specific, due to the digitalization. So there is this notion that indigenous people are now unmuted, so they can speak, So there is this notion of democratization, but I always ask the question, can the subaltern act? And what are the limitations of this action? Because again, when this action takes place, it's sometimes read or interpreted as terrorism, for example. So what do you think about that, and how we can demystify this action, and what are the limitations of this action in a world that it's not only a mindset, but it's really the truth, and I quote an Amazigh.
Can I stop? Can you just get to the question? Because I'm going to press for time.
Okay, that's
Can the subaltern act?
Yeah. So can the subaltern act? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your question. One more, and this is the last one, unfortunately. It's another broad-based question. Where, in your opinion, is Islamophobia most common?
Where is it coming from?
Most common. Where would you most likely encounter it?
Oh, where is it most common? Okay. So to answer your question, can the subaltern act? As I said, they can, but not without backlash. I gave example from India, and we also have example that's live right now, right? Not very far from here. So it's very important that the responsibility to challenge oppression does not fall only on historically marginalized social groups in our society. Those who come from dominant groups and benefit from being in the dominant groups have responsibility to become an ally. There is this false belief that truthful acknowledgement of history is dangerous. The truthful acknowledgement of histories and truthful acknowledgement of histories of land grab, marginalization, marginalization actually empowers everybody, because then we all can live in dignity and safety and salam, right? So can we suppose them act? Yes, they can act, but with enormous injustice, continuing violence of their agency. And this is where it's very important that in each society, dominant groups have a special responsibility to become an ally. Second question, where do I encounter Islamophobia most? Of course, in the West, I cannot give you generalized answer for everybody, but I can give you only my personal answer. I grew up in rural India. you see, identities are heightened, politically heightened. But we are all intersectional and fluid identities, right? I'm a woman. I grew up as a girl, as a student, as somebody who loves plants, who is a gardener, who loves reading. I have so many identities, right? I like music. I like to go out for walking. I'm a walker. I'm a cyclist. We all have very different identities and multiple identities are fluid in us. They're contextually operating as well. So now, people, my friends, did not grow up with Islamophobia. I did not grow up with the idea of Islamophobia. But now it's there. But it's really funded through the war on terror agenda since 9/11 by the US foreign policy, right? So I encounter Islamophobia most in the West. And it's funded through, so mostly Nazanin has this very important book, State, Social Movements and Islamophobia. She's in University of Exeter, and she talks about 5 pillars of Islamophobia. So she talks about the sources where it's coming from. And yes, it is coming from foreign policies in the West to foment Islamophobia.
That unfortunately closes our session with you. So thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the questions as well.
Yes, they were great questions.